My mother tried to abort me for being a girl and worshipped my brother for 28 years, but when he showed up crying, begging my son to carry our last name so they won't disinherit him, I told them my baby will have the surname of the man who did love me and left them with no heir or grandson. I'm 28 years old. I live in California. I'm married to the love of my life, and in 6 months I'm going to have a baby. I should be in the happiest moment of my existence, right? But I need to tell this story because 2 weeks ago, my brother Noah showed up unannounced at my door, literally crying, asking me to give my unborn child my family's last name so our parents won't disinherit him. And when I say he showed up unannounced, I mean I live 2,000 miles away, and we hadn't spoken in years. So yeah, it was completely surreal. To understand why this is so twisted, I have to go back pretty far, like to before I was even born. Turns out my mom never wanted me. I'm not assuming this or exaggerating. It's a literal fact I discovered a few years ago thanks to my Aunt Barbara, who basically spilled all the truth at a family dinner after a few glasses of wine. My mom was obsessed with having only sons. You know, like we were living in medieval times or something. When she got pregnant with me and found out at the ultrasound that I was a girl, she tried to abort me. My dad convinced her not to, because, according to him, it would be bad for their image in the community. But basically, that was the only reason I came into this world. How nice, right? Nothing like knowing your existence was the result of concerns about social reputation and not love or desire to have you. I grew up in a small town in Illinois where everyone knows everyone, and my brother Noah, who's 2 years older than me, was always the golden child. And when I say golden, I mean he literally could do no wrong in my parents' eyes. I was 4 years old when Noah was born, and according to my Aunt Barbara, it was like the sun rose for the first time in my mom's life. I already existed, obviously, but I basically ceased to exist for her the moment Noah arrived. My earliest childhood memories are of sitting in my room while I listened to my parents laughing with Noah in the living room, or being at the dinner table where Noah talked nonstop about his stuff, and I tried to say something, but no one paid attention to me, like I was invisible. Things got worse when we started school. Noah was popular, athletic, got good grades without trying too hard, and my parents went to all his soccer games, all his presentations, all his events. I also got good grades, actually better than Noah's. But when I brought home my report card with straight A's, my mom barely looked at it and said something like, "That's good, Ella. Go do your homework." But when Noah brought home B's and A minuses, it was like he'd won the Nobel Prize, with celebrations and dinners out and the whole complete show. I learned from very early on that no matter what I did, I was never going to be enough for them because my fundamental mistake was being born a girl. The worst part wasn't just the indifference, it was Noah's active sabotage. That kid, and then teenager, quickly realized he had absolute power in that house and used it against me constantly. If I had an important school project, Noah somehow managed to make it get lost or damaged, and when I complained, my parents accused me of being dramatic or blaming my brother for my own irresponsibility. Once, and I remember this perfectly, because I was like 14, I was applying for a summer program at a nearby university, something I really wanted to do, and I needed my parents to sign some papers. I left them on the kitchen table with a note explaining what they were and the deadline. The papers disappeared. When I asked, nobody knew anything. 2 weeks later, I found them torn to pieces in the trash can in Noah's room, and when I confronted him, he just laughed and said, "Prove it." I told my parents, and my dad told me to stop making things up and that Noah would never do something like that I'd probably thrown them away myself and forgotten. I lived like this until I was 18. Every one of Noah's birthdays was a massive production with parties and expensive gifts. While my birthdays were a quick dinner and maybe a greeting card if I was lucky, Noah had the latest phone model, a new laptop for school, a used car they bought him when he turned 16. I had my mom's old phone with a cracked screen and couldn't even dream of asking them for a car. I worked part-time at a coffee shop from age 15 so I could buy my own stuff, because I knew I couldn't depend on them for anything. What saved me, and I'm not exaggerating when I say it literally saved me, was that I was always a very good student. Not because my parents pressured me or supported me, but because I realized education was my ticket out of that house and that town. I studied like crazy during high school, participated in all the extracurricular activities I could, wrote essays for scholarships until my fingers hurt, and in my senior year, I applied for admission to universities in California because I wanted to be as far away from Illinois as possible. When the acceptance letter from UCLA arrived with a full scholarship covering tuition, housing, and food, I literally cried in my room for an hour. It was my escape, my chance to start over where nobody knew me and where I could build my own life. I told my parents at dinner, like all excited because a part of me, as stupid as it was, still had hope they'd be happy for me. UCLA, I told them, with a full scholarship. My mom looked up from her plate, looked at me like I'd told her I was going to Mars, and said, "That's very far, Ella. Couldn't you go to community college here?" My dad didn't even respond, just kept eating. Noah, who was in his second year at the state university 2 hours from home, a university my parents were obviously paying every penny for, let out a laugh and said, "Good luck with that." Like it was a joke that I could achieve something like that. That night, it became crystal clear to me that I wasn't going to receive emotional support from them, but I went anyway. I got on a plane, 3 months later with 2 suitcases, some money I'd saved from my job, and a steel determination to never come back. California was like waking up from a nightmare and realizing life could be different. I met David in my first year, in an intro to psychology class where we ended up as project partners. He was kind, listened when I talked, laughed at my jokes, asked how my day was, and really cared about the answer. Basically, he did all the things my family never did, and at first I didn't know how to handle it because I wasn't used to someone treating me like I mattered. We started dating in our second year, and it was the first time in my life I felt like someone really saw me. Not as the disappointing daughter or the invisible sister, just as Ella, as a complete person. During the 4 years of college, my parents called occasionally, like every 2 or 3 months, but the conversations were always superficial and short, and they never asked how I really was, what I was studying in, detail. If I had friends, nothing substantial. Mostly it was my mom asking if I was eating well and then spending 30 minutes talking to me about Noah's achievements, who was apparently crushing it at university, according to her. Though it was never clear at what exactly because he kept getting mediocre grades and changing majors every semester. The real test came when I graduated. It was May 2018. I was 22 years old. I graduated with honors with a double major in psychology and sociology, and I'd gotten a job at a nonprofit organization in Los Angeles that helped youth in difficult family situations, something that obviously resonated a lot with me. I notified my parents about graduation 3 months in advance, sent them all the details, even offered to help them find a hotel, although I knew they didn't need my help with that because they had money. They didn't come. They called me the day before to tell me it was too complicated to travel all the way to California and that Noah had an important softball game in his adult league or something, and that they couldn't miss it. A recreational softball game was more important than their daughter's graduation from one of the best universities in the country. You know who was there? David's family. His parents, his 2 sisters, his grandmother, everyone flew in from San Diego where they lived, cheered for me when I went up on stage, hugged me afterward, took me out to dinner to celebrate, and his mom even cried and told me how proud she was of me. That day I realized that family isn't always blood, and that I'd already found mine. It just didn't share my last name. David and I got engaged 2 years later, when we were both 24. He'd finished his master's in engineering and gotten an incredible job at a tech company, and I was thriving at my job and had just been promoted to program coordinator. We were living together in a small but cozy apartment in Pasadena. We had a life we'd built together. And when he proposed to me on a hike in the mountains near the city, it was the happiest moment of my life up to that point. I said yes without hesitating for even a second. I announced the engagement in the family group chat. Because yeah, I was still in that chat even though I almost never wrote anything. I posted a photo of the ring, wrote that David had proposed and that we were very excited to start planning the wedding. My mom responded after like 6 hours with a curt "Congratulations, Ella." My dad didn't even react. Noah put a thumbs up emoji. That was it. Meanwhile, when Noah had announced his relationship with Jennifer 2 years earlier, the chat exploded with congratulatory messages, and my parents organized a special dinner and the whole complete number. The wedding was in September 2022, a small, intimate ceremony at a vineyard outside San Diego, near where David's family lived. We invited like 60 people, mostly close friends and David's family, and yes, I invited my parents and Noah with their partners because, I don't know, I guess a part of me still had that ridiculous hope that they'd show up and that somehow things could get better. I sent them the formal invitations months in advance, even called to confirm they'd received them. They said yes, that they'd be there. 2 weeks before the wedding, Noah called me. I remember that call perfectly because I was in the middle of a cake tasting with David and my future mother-in-law when my phone rang. Noah told me, with that voice he always used when he wanted to manipulate something, that he'd been thinking a lot about our relationship and that he felt I'd never valued everything Mom and Dad had done for me, that I'd gone to California and basically abandoned them, that I never called, that I never visited, and that he couldn't in good conscience support my wedding when I treated the family that way. I told him he was completely crazy, that they were the ones I never treated me like part of the family, but he just continued with his rehearsed speech about family loyalty and responsibilities, and I don't know what other nonsense. He hung up saying that Mom and Dad had decided it was better they not go to the wedding, that it would be too uncomfortable for everyone. I stood there with the phone in my hand, shaking with rage and pain, and David hugged me while his mom went to get me water because I couldn't even breathe properly. I got married without my family present. I walked down the aisle on the arm of David's dad, who kindly offered when he found out what had happened, and it was beautiful and sad at the same time. Beautiful, because I was marrying my favorite person in the world, surrounded by people who really loved me, and sad, because, in that moment, any illusion I still had about having a relationship with my parents, or my brother, officially broke. After the wedding, I blocked Noah on everything. I didn't block my parents because, again, that stupid hope was still there somewhere very deep, but I basically stopped trying to communicate with them too. Life went on and it was good, honestly. David and I moved into a small house we bought together in Glendale. I changed jobs to a better-paying position at another organization. He kept progressing in his career. We adopted a cat named Miso, who's basically our furry son. It was the life I'd always wanted. Calm, full of love, without drama. I had my weekly therapy that I'd started in college, and that helped me process all the trauma from my childhood. I had incredible friends. I had David's family who treated me like another daughter. Honestly, I could have continued like this perfectly happy without ever knowing anything about my biological family again, but obviously the universe had other plans. I have a cousin, Ashley, who's my Aunt Barbara's daughter and who was always good to me when we were girls. She still lives in Illinois. In fact, she rents a room in my parents' house because she's saving to buy her own place, and she's been my source of information about what's happening with my family all these years. Not that I actively ask her, but she sends me messages from time to time updating me, I guess because she feels I have a right to know. Like a year and a half ago, Ashley wrote to tell me that Noah and Jennifer were having trouble having children. They'd been trying for like 3 years, had gone to several doctors, and it turned out Noah has pretty serious fertility problems. Something related to low sperm count and low motility. Basically that the chances of him being able to get someone pregnant naturally were extremely low. Jennifer and he had explored options like in vitro fertilization and all that, but it was very expensive and apparently wasn't working. The twisted part, according to Ashley, is that my parents became completely obsessed with the grandchildren topic. And when I say obsessed, I mean it became their constant conversation topic, their source of anxiety, practically their reason for being. You see, my parents, especially my mom, had always fantasized about having biological grandchildren who would continue the family last name. It's a relatively uncommon last name, and my dad was always very weird about that legacy and inheritance stuff and keeping the name alive and all those old-fashioned things. Noah was their golden hope for that, obviously, because I'm a woman, and in their twisted mind, that meant my children, if I ever had them, would carry my husband's last name, not theirs. So all the pressure was on Noah and Jennifer to produce heirs or whatever. When it became clear that Noah probably could never have biological children, my parents went crazy. Ashley would tell me how my parents constantly pressured Noah and Jennifer about seeking more treatments, about considering sperm donors, about adoption, about anything. Jennifer, who according to Ashley was always a very sweet person, was completely devastated by the pressure. Noah was also devastated, but more than anything because for the first time in his life he'd disappointed my parents, and he didn't know how to handle that feeling because he'd never experienced it before. The relationship between Noah and my parents became super tense. He was no longer the perfect golden child. He was the son who couldn't give them the one thing they really wanted at that moment. My mom would get cold with him. My dad made passive-aggressive comments about continuing the family legacy. Ashley told me that once she heard my dad say something like, "What did we pay for all your college and house for, if you can't even do this for us?" Which is absolutely vile if you think about it. All my parents' love, it turns out, was completely conditional, and Noah was experiencing for the first time what I'd lived my entire life. Things escalated like 8 months ago when my parents basically gave Noah an ultimatum. According to Ashley, there was a very tense family dinner where my dad told Noah that if he didn't find a way to give them a biological grandchild with the family last name, they were going to reconsider all the financial support they'd given him. And we're talking about a lot of money. They paid for his entire college, bought him his house, helped him with monthly payments, had lent him money for investments. Basically, Noah lived largely thanks to them. The threat was clear. Fix this or we cut you off. Noah panicked. He and Jennifer considered all possible options, spent thousands of dollars on more treatments that didn't work. She had like 3 IVF cycles that failed. It was a nightmare for both of them. Jennifer eventually reached her limit and told him she couldn't take the pressure anymore, that her mental health was destroyed, that they needed to stop. But Noah couldn't stop, because for him, this wasn't just about having children. It was about maintaining the approval and support of our parents. Something he'd had guaranteed his entire life, and that was now in danger. While all this was happening, I was in California living my life without knowing most of these details, because Ashley only told me the basics by message, and I honestly didn't ask much because I didn't want to get involved. David and I had been talking about having children, but there was no rush. We were 27 and 28 respectively. We were focused on our careers and on enjoying being just the two of us for a while. But last year, like in March or April, we decided we were ready. I stopped taking birth control pills. And to both our surprise, I got pregnant almost immediately. By June, I had the positive confirmation. And we were completely excited and terrified in the best possible way. We told David's family first, obviously, and it was a huge celebration with happy crying and hugs and plans for the baby shower. I was in that first trimester happiness bubble, with horrible morning sickness, but with an excitement I'd never felt before. I didn't tell my parents anything, because honestly we never talked, and I didn't feel like I had to share something so important and beautiful with people who hadn't been present in my life. I mentioned it to Ashley because she and I did maintain contact, and I asked her not to tell anyone in the family. But she said I probably should tell them myself at some point because they were going to find out eventually anyway, and it would be weird if they didn't know. I didn't get to tell them because 2 weeks after that conversation with Ashley, on a Saturday afternoon when David and I were watching a movie in the living room, someone knocked on the door. David went to open it, and I heard a male voice that was familiar, but that I couldn't place at first, because it had been so long. I got up from the couch and got to the door, just as David stepped aside with a confused expression, and there was Noah, in my doorway, in California, after years, without contact, and after he and my parents deliberately missed my wedding. He looked terrible, honestly. He'd lost weight, had dark circles under his eyes, looked like he hadn't slept well in weeks. He looked at me with that expression, I guess was supposed to be remorseful or pleading, and said, "Ella, I need to talk to you. It's urgent." I was in complete shock, couldn't even process that he was there, and only managed to say, "What are you doing here?" He looked at David and then at me and said, "Can we talk in private?" And I, still processing, said no. "Whatever you have to say, you can say it in front of my husband." Right there in my house's entrance, Noah proceeded to tell me the whole story of his infertility, of my parents' pressure, of the financial ultimatum, of how Jennifer and he had exhausted all options. He spoke quickly, like he had everything rehearsed, and I was just standing there listening, unable to believe what was happening. Then, he got to the point, and I swear, when he said it, I thought I was hallucinating. He told me that Ashley had told him I was pregnant, that this was the perfect solution, that if I agreed to give my baby our family's last name instead of David's, that would solve the whole problem with our parents. That technically it would be their biological nephew, that my parents could have the grandchild with their last name they wanted so badly, that everyone would win because I'd still have my baby but with a different last name. What importance did that really have? I stared at him, unable to speak for like 10 seconds. David was the first to react and said, "You've got to be kidding, right?" But Noah ignored him and kept talking, saying things like, "Think about it, Ella. It's just a last name. You have something I desperately need. We can finally fix our relationship. Mom and Dad would be so happy you could be part of the family again." And it was that last part that snapped me out of shock and filled me with a rage I'd never felt before. I told him, with a calm I didn't know I had, "Did you really just show up after years? After convincing our parents not to come to my wedding, after a lifetime of making my existence miserable, to ask me to use my child as a solution to your problem? Noah tried to interrupt, but I kept talking. I told him that my baby was going to carry David's last name because David was his dad and because we were a family, a real family that chose and supported each other, not like the dysfunctional family we grew up with. I told him that he and my parents had had decades to treat me like a human being with value, and that they'd chosen not to do it every time. And that I wasn't going to let them use my child to perpetuate their sick obsession with their last name and their legacy. Noah started getting desperate, saying I didn't understand how serious this was, that he was going to lose everything, that our parents were going to disinherit him, that Jennifer and he had no other options. And I told him that wasn't my problem, that he'd enjoyed a whole life of privileges and advantages while I was invisible, and that now that he was finally facing consequences for something, he couldn't run to me to rescue him. David, who until that moment had stayed quiet but tense at my side, told Noah to leave our property immediately or we'd call the police. Noah looked at me with a mixture of disbelief and rage, and let out his true self, the one I knew so well from our childhood. He told me I'd always been selfish, that I'd never valued family, that I was an ungrateful person who'd run away to California and abandoned everyone, that our parents were right about me, that I didn't deserve to have children if I was going to be so cruel as to deny this to my own brother. I didn't respond. Just opened my phone, dialed 911, and Noah saw I was serious. He finally left, got in his rental car, and drove away, but not without first yelling from the window that this wasn't over. I collapsed after he left. David held me while I cried on the floor of our living room, not from sadness exactly, but from a mixture of rage, relief, and emotional exhaustion. All the peace I'd built in my life, all the work I'd done in therapy to heal from my childhood trauma, everything seemed fragile suddenly because my toxic family had invaded my safe space. A week later, my parents followed through on their threat with Noah. Ashley wrote to tell me there was a horrible scene at the house where my dad told Noah he'd disappointed him in the worst possible way, that he couldn't trust him to continue the family legacy, and that from that moment on, he wouldn't receive another penny of support. They cut off his line of credit, stopped paying his mortgage, basically left him financially hanging overnight. Jennifer and Noah went into crisis, had to put their house up for sale. She had to look for full-time work while Noah looked for a second job, because turns out when you live your whole life with financial support from your parents, you don't develop the skills to support yourself alone. 2 days after my parents cut Noah off, I received a call from my mom. I hadn't spoken to her in over a year, and seeing her name on my screen gave me instant anxiety. But I answered. Her voice was the one she always used when she wanted something, sweet and manipulative at the same time. She said, "Hi, Ella. How have you been, honey? I heard you're pregnant. Congratulations." I said thanks dryly and waited because I knew she hadn't called to congratulate me. She kept talking about how time had passed so quickly, about how it was time to let go of resentments from the past, about how family was the most important thing at the end of the day. Then she got to her point. She told me she'd heard about Noah's visit, that he'd told her about his conversation with me, and that she wanted to talk to me directly about the last name issue, and that she understood I was upset about things from the past, but that this was bigger than any personal problem, that it was about preserving the family name for future generations, that my dad and she had worked so hard their whole life to build a legacy, and that I had the opportunity to be part of that in a meaningful way, that if I agreed to give my baby their last name, they'd be willing to reconcile with me, to include me back in the family, even to help me financially with the baby. I asked her if she was hearing what she was saying, if she realized that basically she was offering me conditional love in exchange for using my child for their purposes. She said she didn't see it that way, that I was being dramatic as always, that they were just asking me for something small that would make a big difference for everyone. I told her the answer was no, that my child was going to carry his father's last name, and that there was no amount of manipulation or bribery that was going to change that. She started raising her voice, saying that after everything they'd done for me, I owed them at least this. And I told her, what exactly did you do for me? Ignore me my whole childhood? Miss my graduation? Not come to my wedding? That's not doing something for someone. That's abandonment. She got furious then, her true personality finally coming out. She told me I'd always been a mistake, that she'd wanted to abort and that maybe she should have, that I'd been a burden from the moment I was born, that I was lucky they'd kept and educated me, that I had no right to judge them, I told her I never asked to be born, that that was her and my dad's decision, and that bringing me into the world didn't give them the right to mistreat me. I told her she was a horrible mother and that I was never going to allow her to meet my child. I hung up while she was still yelling. My dad called the next day with a different but equally toxic approach. He tried the man-to-man angle, so to speak, talking about family responsibilities and honor and continuity. When he saw that wasn't working, he switched to veiled threats about not being in the will, about how I was cutting myself off from any future inheritance. I told him I'd never counted on receiving anything from them, and I wasn't going to start now. I hung up that call too, and immediately blocked both numbers. Ashley wrote me a huge apology saying she never thought Noah would use the information about my pregnancy that way, that she felt terrible for having been the one who triggered everything. I told her it wasn't her fault, that this would have come to light eventually anyway, and that it was okay. I asked her to keep me updated on the situation just to be aware, but that I'd understand if she didn't want to be in the middle of all this. She said she'd definitely keep me informed because the situation was crazy and someone sane needed to document it. It's been 2 weeks since the blocking and my life is quiet again. David has been incredible through all this. Never for even a second made me feel like I should consider my family's ridiculous request. His family, my real family, is excited about the baby's arrival and is already planning the shower and buying things for their first grandchild. My baby is going to carry the last name Davis, David's last name, and is going to grow up surrounded by real and unconditional love, not the twisted and conditional kind I experienced. I'm in therapy, processing all this because although I'm at peace with my decisions, I can't deny it stirs up a lot of trauma and pain. My therapist says that establishing these boundaries is the healthiest thing I could do, both for me and for my future child. Last week, Ashley sent me an update. Noah and Jennifer sold their house, moved to a small apartment, are doing couples therapy to deal with all the stress. Jennifer is considering divorce according to rumors, though Noah tells everyone they're fine. My parents are bitter and angry, tell their version of the story to anyone who'll listen, painting me as the cruel daughter who denied them meeting their grandchild. Ashley says most of the extended family sees through their lies because everyone knows how they treated me for years, but my parents are too wrapped up in their own narrative to realize it. I'm 6 months pregnant now. It's a boy. And every time I feel his little kicks, I think about how lucky he is to be born into this family that David and I have built, not the one I inherited. Sometimes I feel bad for Noah because I know what it's like to be under the weight of our parents' impossible expectations. But then I remember he had decades to choose to be different, to be better, and he always chose his comfort over doing the right thing. This situation with fertility didn't create his character. It just revealed it. I don't regret anything. My son is going to know where he comes from. I'm going to be honest with him when he's old enough to understand. But he's going to grow up knowing that sometimes family is the one you choose, not the one you get. And that establishing boundaries with toxic people, even if they share your blood, isn't just okay but necessary to survive. He's going to have grandparents who love him in the Davis family. He's going to have cousins and uncles and aunts who really care about him. And he's going to have parents who will never condition their love on achievements or specific expectations. My parents never loved me for being who I was. They only saw me as a disappointment from the day I was born, a girl instead of a boy. I spent 28 years trying to earn a love that was never available to me. I'm not going to let them use my child to fill that void they themselves created with their ridiculous expectations and destructive favoritism. And I'm definitely not going to sacrifice my husband's last name, the man who loved me when they couldn't, just to feed the ego of people who never acted like real family. Last week, my mother-in-law asked me if I'd ever regret permanently cutting off contact with my parents. I told her I'd already grieved the family I never had years ago, that this was just closing a door that was practically closed anyway. There's peace in that, you know? In finally letting go of the hope that things could be different and accepting that some people will never change, no matter how much you wish it. My son is going to carry the Davis last name with pride, and he's going to grow up without the weight of toxic expectations and conditional love. That's the best revenge I can have against a family that never valued me, raising him in an environment full of the love they never knew how to give me. And that, in the end, is enough for me.